Gulf of America, the debate over renaming the Gulf of Mexico. Introduction. The Gulf of Mexico, a vast body of water bordering the southeastern United States, Mexico, and Cuba, has been a crucial economic and cultural region for centuries. In recent years, there have been occasional proposals, mostly driven by nationalist and political sentiments, to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. This idea, though not formally pursued by the U.S. government, raises questions about history, geopolitics, legal frameworks, and international relations. This document examines the historical context of the Gulf's name, the arguments for and against the name change, legal implications, political reactions, and potential consequences of such a move. Historical context. The Gulf of Mexico was named by early European explorers, particularly the Spanish, who arrived in the 16th century. It has been recognized internationally by this name for centuries, with indigenous peoples long before European arrival referring to the waters through their own terms. The Gulf has played a significant role in trade, fishing, and military strategy throughout history. Geopolitical significance. The Gulf of Mexico serves as a vital economic and strategic waterway for the United States, Mexico, and Cuba. It supports major industries, including oil and gas, shipping, and tourism. Renaming the Gulf to the Gulf of America could create diplomatic tensions, particularly with Mexico, which shares a large portion of the coastline. Additionally, international treaties governing maritime boundaries and resources could complicate any attempts to rename the body of water. Arguments for the name change supporters of renaming the Gulf of Mexico argue from the perspective of national identity, historical revisionism, and political symbolism. Some of the main points include strengthening U.S. identity. Proponents believe renaming the Gulf would reinforce American sovereignty over U.S. coastal waters, reducing foreign influence. Some argue that calling it the Gulf of Mexico maintains an outdated reference to Spanish and Mexican colonial influence. Nationalistic sentiments. Advocates see the name change as a way to assert U.S. dominance in the region, similar to past renaming efforts, such as changing French fries to freedom fries during political tensions with France. Arguments against the name. Change critics of the proposal highlight historical accuracy, international recognition, and diplomatic consequences as major reasons against renaming the Gulf. Key arguments include historical precedents. The name Gulf of Mexico has been recognized for centuries, and altering it would disregard historical context. International recognition. The name is enshrined in global maps, treaties, and agreements, and changing it unilaterally could create international backlash. Legal complexities. International maritime law, including treaties such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, recognizes the Gulf of Mexico under its current name. Economic impacts. A name change could confuse businesses, disrupt tourism branding, and affect navigation and trade agreements. Legal and diplomatic challenges. Renaming a major international body of water would present significant legal and diplomatic obstacles. The United States would need to engage in negotiations with Mexico and other affected nations. Additionally, international bodies such as the United Nations and the International Hydrographic Organization, IHO, would have to recognize the change, which is unlikely given Mexico's opposition. Public and political reactions. While the idea of renaming the Gulf has surfaced occasionally, it has not gained significant traction among U.S. lawmakers or the public. Political analysts argue that such a move would be seen as an unnecessary provocation toward Mexico. On the other hand, some nationalist groups and certain political figures have expressed support for the idea, though mainly as a rhetorical stance rather than a serious policy initiative. Potential consequences. Renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America could have broad implications, including strained U.S.-Mexico relations. Such a move would likely be viewed as an affront to Mexico's sovereignty and could damage diplomatic relations. Economic disruptions, shipping, trade, tourism, and industries reliant on established geographical names could face confusion and rebranding challenges. Political controversy. The name change would likely spark domestic political debates, with opposition from historians, legal experts, and international relations scholars. Lack of global recognition. Even if the U.S. adopted the name internally, the rest of the world would likely continue to use Gulf of Mexico. Conclusion. While the proposal to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America has been discussed in some circles, it remains an unlikely and impractical endeavor. Economic and legal challenges of renaming international treaties and agreements. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and other international agreements recognize the Gulf of Mexico as a shared water body among the United States, Mexico, and Cuba. Renaming it unilaterally could violate international norms and treaties. Economic considerations, trade and commerce. The Gulf of Mexico is a major hub for international shipping, offshore drilling, and fishing industries. Changing the name could create logistical and administrative costs for businesses and governments. Tourism and branding. Cities like Cancun, New Orleans, and Tampa have built tourism industries around the Gulf's identity. A name change could disrupt branding and marketing efforts. Cultural and historical backlash. Mexican and Latin American perspectives for Mexico. Renaming the Gulf could be seen as an erasure of its historical connection to the region. Mexico's coastal cities, industries, and people have long depended on the Gulf, and any attempt to alter its name would likely be met with strong opposition from the Mexican government and public. U.S. public opinion. While some Americans might support a nationalist-driven name change, a significant portion of the population would likely see it as unnecessary or even controversial. Many Americans recognize the Gulf's historical and cultural significance beyond national borders. Feasibility and process of renaming. Renaming a major geographical feature would require action at multiple levels of governance. Congressional legislation. A name change would likely require approval from Congress and relevant federal agencies. Geographical naming authorities, organizations like the U.S. Board on Geographic Names, BGN, and the International Hydrographic Organization, IHO, would need to approve the new name. International recognition. The name Gulf of Mexico is recognized globally. Convincing other countries, international organizations, and map publishers to adopt Gulf of America would be challenging. Precedents for renaming geographical features. Persian Gulf versus Arabian Gulf. Some Arab nations have attempted to rename the Persian Gulf as the Arabian Gulf, but the international community continues to recognize the original name. Sea of Japan versus EC. South Korea has pushed for EC instead of Sea of Japan, but widespread global adoption has been slow. These cases highlight the difficulty of renaming